next time.
So one thing that we talked about last time is my buddy Charlie and the pizza guy. What I want to emphasize to just start off is we're going to talk about the labor theory of value, so we have to understand Smith's sort of radical claim. So the difference between these two people that we're told, if we view this in the Smithian lens, is much more habit or what they've done in their lives than sort of who they were when they were born. Right? This is the radical claim of Smith. Now, not to be confused with the fact that things like intelligence don't matter. What he's saying is that our vanity puts more into the differences that don't matter, or don't matter as much, than actually matters, right? So I guess in the conversation in the last class, I was thinking about this. So somebody said, well, what are you telling me, Professor? People that are autistic or something, there's no difference, they're all the same. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. People are different, but we attribute too much difference. And so when we were doing some research on laws in Nebraska about people that are disabled, specifically with autism disorder, it's really hard to get a job given that you're on the spectrum, right? But it shouldn't be, because little things can go a long way to make up for the gap. Right? So what we attribute to a huge difference in the way people are really comes down to somebody getting some counseling help to help them understand maybe water cooler talk at work. Right? So if you're somebody that doesn't really get social cues, that can be debilitating, but it's a fairly easy thing to fix. And so I think a Smithian analysis would say, well, what's the really simple solution here that gets rid of the problem and makes it so that people aren't really that different? Right? So meeting with a counselor every other week for 30 minutes and talking about what's going on at work and having them go, okay, let me explain what's actually going on, what people are actually talking about. Right? So you're at Union Pacific, people are talking about getting fired. They're worried about that. So the kind of things they're saying are hyperbolic. So just explaining those helps to go a long way. Helps with me a lot. My wife basically performs this service with me. It's okay. You're just angry. You don't really believe that you're terrible. She may be overdoing it. I don't know. But right, so just having this idea that people are more or less the same makes us attribute far less to our differences. That's the real point. It's not that everything is the same. So if you view the world this way, if you see the only difference between Charlie and the pizza guy is that Charlie spent a lot more time reading Spinoza and Nietzsche than this guy, which another thing about division of labor is maybe you don't want to spend all your time reading Spinoza and Nietzsche. Maybe that's his particular expertise. He's read a lot of books on that. Okay. And that's why he's a professor in the Liver Boy, and that's also explains something about the difference in their salaries. Right? The kind of people that can put up with reading Spinoza and Nietzsche are rare. It takes a long time. You have to have a particular type of analytical skill to be a philosopher. And political theorists are good at reading comprehension, philosophers are good at analytical thinking, economists might be good at math. And these are different skills, but they're slightly, not necessarily related, they're emphasized by the habit.
Is the habit, or is it mostly like attitude differences or like preferences that some people have then, or is it society that sort of says like, because you're on the autism spectrum, these opportunities are closed off to you, because like you were born into a poor family?
Yeah, so saying the opportunity to be closed off would be anti-Semitic, would be different.
So is Smith pointing out that society does close those off, or is Smith saying that like these differences are accounted for because of like attitude differences?
So his point is that our vanity attributes a lot to the differences that isn't there. Right? So, it may be that people in this room have a higher IQ than What really matters is that you went to a good high school. Because with the IQ, absent the high school, you won't be.
Would you say that disparity is disrupting the harmony or producing inequality? Which box would you put it?
So it has an impact on both. To the extent that there's inequality, this is a problem with sort of social order and harmony. Smith, I think, is trying to address this issue by saying, look, if we actually focus on the rules that give everybody opportunity, the property rights, right, the sort of legal system, right, that we'll see far less inequality. Right, so it's a prediction. And depending on when you run the prediction, right, so if you say, is the world more equal in 1725 versus 1925? Anybody want to argue? I think it's a clear case. 200 years between 1725 and 1925. And we can take slices of this and we can try different time periods or whatever. I kind of joke, and after the next test, I'll talk a little bit more about the 19th century, but I'll joke and I'll say 1871 is a really important year because that's when we discovered we needed modern sewage to prevent disease spreading. Right, so John Snow, not the guy from the Game of Thrones, although it seems like Game of Thrones outside. But John Snow, who was an epidemiologist, that's what we would call it now, took the handle off the pump where he predicted there was cholera in the water. Right? And people stopped getting sick by taking the handle off of one pump in downtown London. That was a major point in advance. I don't want to live before 1871. I'll debate anything after that. But what I said earlier when we started talking about the sort of mercantilists and what life was like before Smith wrote, before Mandeville, and this stuff, I said, look, you were twice as likely to die before age 5. You were at least twice as likely to die in childbirth if you were a woman. Your age, how long you lived, your life expectancy was dramatically shorter. The amount of money you had after your labors as a common laborer was much less. In real terms, trying to adjust to real values. So it seems like something happened, and we're trying to understand whether Smith's description of that is correct. And I think what I tried to say when we introduced Smith is to say, Smith had an idea that labor was an asset and not a liability. So all of what Smith is doing, in my opinion, especially in the Wealth of Nations, is to try to justify that, try to explain how labor is an asset. And labor theory of value, for all of its flaws, gives you a really good understanding of where productivity comes from and why labor is an asset. Which means that you can do certain things with a rising population that actually make you stronger as a country rather than weaker because you have threats of famine and starvation, which was pretty much the case throughout much of human history.
So you think that is like underlying view on like human nature, just kind of like the difference between us and exacerbated as a result of like these things that we spend time doing. That kind of complements the later theory of value, right? Because then you say, well, it's just how we formulate the systems that kind of create, optimize, or create those.
Yep. So in the old system, Charlie would be a philosopher because his parents sent him to school.
Right.
And the street porter, you guys know what a street porter is? You could put on like a special jacket and sit outside banks or other important buildings, and if people had a note to go across town, they would just come out and tip you. You'd carry the note, tell you where to go. You'd carry it across town, and then the people on the other end would tip you as well. That's how you get food. So pizza delivery is the closest I can come up with. Go ahead.
Sort of along that line. Is Smith at all contemptuous of previous societies? Does he take things that they have the ability?
That's a hard question to answer, so let me answer it in a slightly different way. Right?
Okay.
So, what Smith is trying to do is say, look, the old aristocratic order is gone. But if we're not careful, we're gonna lose, we're gonna turn it into a villain, it's gonna be completely, without a foundation. So where is morality gonna come from? Where are the rules, where is justice gonna come from if we don't start thinking about what's gonna replace the aristocratic order? So it's very important for him to make these claims that markets are sort of empowering or connect us to other people. We, mute down our extreme views when we go on the markets, so that we eventually discover better and more universal values. Right? Now, I think Smith is extremely optimistic on this because he's basically saying, oh yeah, if you have market competition, people will doctrine a wide variety of people, and they will all develop sort of unbiased views about the world. We'll flash forward to 2019. Either we haven't gotten there yet, or something's wrong with Smith's theory that you just allow competition and the best ideas rise to the top. So one of the questions implicit in this Smithian, taking the time with Smith is he wrong? Why is he wrong? So let's look, we've got some other ways to think about the same issue. But the reason that Charlie is Charlie is because the habits that he's taken on. And the reason the street porter is the street porter is because he didn't have that same set of circumstances. So let's take any single person in the room, right, and put them under the same sort of harsh circumstances that somebody who didn't get a chance to go to Creighton was under. And is the outcome just reversed? Let's switch people. It's the old Prince and the Pauper tale. If you switch people, are the outcomes just reversed? For the vast majority of people. Somebody in the last class got pressing me about genius and things like this. I said, well, I just watched this thing on Woodside this morning that says he's not really a genius. And it had all these reasons why Mozart was not a genius.
How would Smith then talk about examples of adversity where George Washington Carver didn't have the opportunity to be a philosopher or whatever, but he's I don't know, was a super smart scientist guy, and but under the Smith idea, it seems like he wouldn't have been able to do that. So how would Smith answer examples of where someone's poor and
George Washington Carver went to school for a really long time.
yeah, I know he did, but so he was able to do that, but he didn't come out of
I think this actually reinforces Smith's point. I'm having trouble finding it. So anyone, given the same habits, would end up in the same place, right? So the implication is, a lot of times, make sure this guy goes to school. Problem here, we'll get to this in the next class, is do we really want everybody to be Charlie? I won't tell him. He's a nice enough guy. He walks around in a smoking jacket and a special hat with a tassel on it and smokes his pipe at Eugene State. And everybody's too scared to tell him not to smoke on campus because they want to be tolerant. But nobody understands. They don't have any rules for being in Vito. They just kind of walk around smoking. And a smoking jacket. It's like a round tap with a tassel on it. It's all smoking everywhere. All right, so one of the things we have to answer about the invisible hand, so you want to talk about harmony, so we've got laissez-faire and the physiographs, we've got the invisible hand, these are sort of ways to talk about harmony and social order. What about the invisible fist? What about the fact that you set up power and automatically those in power are targets of manipulation by crony interests? And so you set up a system with power, it's certainly going to be corrupted. So how can you guarantee that the interventions that you're putting into social order sort of wash out to level the playing field rather than stack the deck against certain parties? It's not obvious to me that setting up a mechanism to intervene is always going to be used the right way. I think Smith is really worried about this, because he says basically, anytime two or more businessmen get together, even for merriment or diversion, their conversation turns towards a conspiracy against the public. It's just a principle. If you have the means, you will accumulate power. You will work with other people. This is oligopoly or strategic manipulation of markets or whatever. He's really worried about this. So can he envision a system of justice which excludes the ability to use the government to intervene against the public? You can see the influence of the physiocrats here, and you also see some slight difference in the way that he's setting up the analogy. I think the physiocrats probably thought this was easier to do than Smith did. All right. So the way that people have talked about this is to say, how do you set up a rule of law, not the rule of man? All right. Again, this is just an example. James Madison is also inspired very much by the Scottish Enlightenment, including Smith. Now he writes, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls in government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the government, give them power, control people that need to be constrained. But then you have to also oblige them to control themselves. So once you give somebody power, that power can be used in a variety of ways. Why do you think it's going to be used in the way, in the service in which you set up the justification for power in the first place? If you go down to my office, you'll see a picture of Ulysses tied to the mast of the ship with the sirens. This is a way of illustrating the concept. A lot of people said, Ulysses has to be bound by other people, because if he was strong enough to bind himself, he was also strong enough to break the bonds. Temptation is very real. Nobody can survive the temptation. You have to have institutional controls. Can you imagine perfect institutional controls? What's the implication of that? Madison obviously talked about this like that. Madison's approach to the Constitution. All right. So labor theory of value. All right. So we all, every single one of us in this room, has the same amount of time in a given day. We use it differently. We're all the same amount of time. Same number of days a week, 365 and a quarter days a year. Years in a lifetime, right? Well, we all have limited time. And so when you start thinking about this, as we're switching from the physiocrats to the labor theory of value under Smith, the man theory of value to the labor theory of value, we're putting at the center of the theory a person, an individual, a human. Right? So you can see the humanism in Smith, right? Really taking humanity, a human-centric way of understanding value. And I think that's a really appealing part of the way we switch to labor theory of value. Puts the human being at the very center of the time the person has. So it's fundamentally egalitarian, and I mean it this way: if you think about the type of economy that Smith was trying to describe, it's largely agricultural. It's starting to move towards industrial, but he's still looking backwards, right? So he's not looking forwards. He hasn't seen that yet. Largely agricultural labor. There isn't that much variation in the wages that you would pay a day laborer. Even when you get to the industrial labor, just thinking about two people working on the same line, you're not going to get paid different wages, right? So the average wage was a modal wage as well, right? This is a way of thinking about it, right? So if you think about a laborer's wage, you can think of it as having more or less some value. So then you start trying to figure out why would ever differ. If you're doing a day's worth of work, why would it ever differ? as opposed to our modern society where we have tons and tons of different activations, everybody gets paid something different. So some goods are not plentiful enough to meet everyone's desire for them, and that's going to help explain why some goods are different. But should that work with labor? What kind of laborers are more desirable? Right? So again, just underscoring the idea that when we talk about market natural price in Smith, if you read anybody gonna read book 1? So when he goes off into detail about the difference between the natural and market, let me try to explain what the natural is. This is really just the equilibrium in some macro sense, right, in your macro model. Because two things are important. One, most of the products being bought and produced in the economy are oats and wheat, right? You're gonna have bread, you're gonna have porridge. And that's what a lot of people are eating 3 meals a day. So it's a very large number of the transactions relative to the total economy. 2, the pound sterling is in circulation. Now it's not pure silver, but it's still a commodity-based monetary system. So over large arcs of time, you've got a real value, which is priced in terms of another commodity like silver. So you don't have nominal prices, you have real prices, because you're not inflating a fiat currency. So you're actually looking at prices that are relatively the same ratio between pound sterling and wheat over 200 years. So to say that it always returns to a natural price is to say that there's a certain proportion between wheat and sterling that seems to be an anchor in gravity. We can do this with modern models because we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and we just adjust for price level and we get an equilibrium. Does that make sense? So there's an equilibrium price, it's more or less dictated by supply and demand. We don't have supply and demand. What he's saying is there's some scarcity sometimes. He knows something about cost, how much labor goes into it. He knows something about scarcity, but he doesn't have a theory of demand, the way you guys would have done. That was from Marshall at the beginning of the 20th century. All right, so the market is, I would encourage you to think about the market as the spot price, and this is the sort of long run equilibrium price. All right. So we can figure out wages. We just sort of take the average wage, which is the total wages divided by the number of workers. They talk about this for the next 100 years. It's going to be the default because labor is generally seen as homogeneous. So if you're going to differ from this average, you're going to basically a different wage. You're going to have a theory of why. And here are some ways that Smith thinks about it. Right? So if the occupation is particularly messy or dirty, you guys know Mike Rowe, dirty jobs, right? So if it's a particularly dirty job, you should get paid more, right? And if it's a particularly nice job, maybe it pays less. Cost for acquiring skills. This is where we see, if people have to go and shell out money to go into a profession, they're only going to do that if it's relatively costly and they can then get a return once they're in. It's the whole theory of coming to school, right? You get some skills, and other people get around getting, and then you're going to get a higher salary than the other folks. Regularity of employment, right? If the job is only used every so often, it should pay more than the average amount of work that you do because you're not working all the time. So in order to do that, if you didn't pay more, people wouldn't go into that profession. Level of trust and responsibility. This is as close to the modern concept of efficiency wage, right? If somebody is particularly trustworthy, you might not want them to leave, so you pay them a little bit more in order to keep them around, if you think they're particularly trustworthy. Probability of success is going to account for risk taking. So if we thought about commission, people can pay on commission, they get paid a little bit more because if you're not really good at it, you're not going to make much money. By the way, a lot of the taxes on imports were collected by commissioners. Right? People that just basically went up and kind of under threat got the tax money off of the imports. Some people are particularly good at it. It's kind of a mafioso kind of thing, right? If you were in commission and you paid a tax, you were paying a commission. Somebody would collect tax. So I would imagine if the commission paid you money, because it was becoming risky and the probability is low that you're actually going to get paid everything you're supposed to collect. All right, so here are different factors. Labor is paid a wage, land is paid a rent. Stock, the reason I put this picture here is because this is where the word comes from, livestock. So remember, as we're moving from an agricultural society to an industrial society, people are going in and buying stock together. Well, it becomes capital, it becomes, these other words, but stock, a share of stock is coming from this older usage of going in on joint venture, buy a cow, have that cow, get milk, and then ultimately have other livestock. Okay. So the profit is earned by buying something that is going to appreciate in value. The land is a fixed resource and pays the rent, and the labor is paid a wage. And these are all supposed to work out. Right, so it won't be until we get to Ricardo that we come up with a differential if you're making more money than what's justified by stock, land, and labor. But Smith is just saying everybody earns a return. The return is paid through different factors. Wage is just a return to the factor that goes into it. When he's thinking about money, he tells this sort of strange conjectural history of money. Anthropologists love to attack this part because it didn't actually happen. It's just a speculative history of how we got the types of money that we got. It's a pretty good history nonetheless. Right? So have you guys ever talked about what types of things were used for money throughout history? It would surprise you to know that butter was used as money in Scandinavian countries. It has to be coal. But the reason this is because people kind of know what they're getting with butter. It's easy to divide, it's easy to put that together in big blocks. You kind of know how much is there. So it's recognizable, you can determine the value, it's divisible and fusible, and it's readily tradable with other things. Other things that have been used as money are salt. So if you get paid a salary, that's derivative of the word salt. And if you say that someone's not worth their salt because they didn't actually perform up to the wage they were paid. Ultimately, what this theory predicts is something like silver or gold will become a really good currency because it's easily recognized. You guys watched Looney Tunes growing up? If somebody Sam bites the gold coin, that's how you test. You put actually put a tooth mark in a gold coin. Because it melts at a pretty low temperature, it's pretty soft at room temperature. I don't advise going around biting gold coins. It's a way to demonstrate that it's a unique type of metal. It doesn't tarnish, so if you have tarnish on it, it's not really gold. So it's heavy, so when you weigh it, you know how pure it is by the weight. It's hard to put other things in it that are as heavy as gold. If it's lighter than it should be, it's not pure gold. So you have a weight that you carry around with you to know is the right one to put another gold coin on the scale and see what happens. It can be divided, may change. You guys know they used to cut. If you had a dollar coin, you cut it in half, 2 pieces. So they may change. And then readily tradable for other things. You're pretty sure that if I give you butter, you're probably going to look at me strange and go, no. But if I give you gold, I don't really have to establish that gold has a value, right? You're pretty sure you can turn around and get whatever value for it. There's a market for it. So these are the types of principles that Smith is working with to try to understand value. And he's extending these same types of, the same sort of logic to labor. Alright, so in order to get growth, you just increase labor productivity. So I emphasize it over and over again that Smith is giving us a theory by which labor is an asset, not a liability. Right? So in the past, as you got more and more labor, you run the risk of famine. And so this sort of justifies the old hierarchical view that we were worried about under the old system, which is here are all the sort of people with lots of food, those are all the people without a lot of food, and if they get too numerous, we're all going to run out of food. So it's a hierarchical view. Smith is flipping this and saying, no, we're all actually pretty much the same. Labor is actually a resource. As labor grows in productivity, we will all be better off. That's a pretty radical notion. So anything that causes increased productivity, where do you get productivity? Specialization of labor, so that's increase in dexterity, saving time, innovation. Specialization has those three things that pay off in Adam Smith's system. All right, so I specialize, I produce more I can work less, and everybody else is going to more in society. So here's an example of how you would evaluate any kind of policy through a Smithian framework. You start with the basic assumption that all value comes from labor, and that the division of labor increases output from the labor. So any policy can be evaluated on whether or not it increases the division of labor. So an example might be infrastructure development. You put in canals, you put in better roads. This is going to allow people to trade over larger distances. This is going to allow for more specialization, greater productivity. These are all good things. So one of the roles that Smith will attribute to the sovereign or the commonwealth is to develop infrastructure. But it all comes out from a basic idea that labor productivity is a good thing, that you produce more for everyone in society. Based on this idea of expanding the extent of the market and increasing the So book 5 is going to go through the sovereign or the commonwealth. If you only read 2 books out of Wealth of Nations, so some of the big 5, 2-volume Wealth of Nations, just read book 1 and book 5. And then if you like those, you'll probably want to read book 4. What I'm really saying is just skip the digression on silver, because it's exactly that. Very long discussion of natural prices and commodities in terms of silver over time, which doesn't end up going anywhere, because we don't think of it that way anymore. Everything else is kind of cool. It's got some interesting things to puzzle with. But in book 5, it talks about first step, ensure that other people aren't going to come and steal everything you've got. So that's defense. Your community has to mount defense. Second step, internal justice, peace. Set up a rule of law so that people know what's theirs and what's everyone else's. Third step, develop infrastructure. This is the recipe that Smith has for growth. If you read through this carefully, you'll see some hints of blocking here, about property and stuff like that. So, all right. So as you develop defense, you're going to have protection against foreign enemies, and then you're going to go to develop a domestic culture. What does that culture look like? This is justice. You create peace and property rights. Before I read this quote, I'll just ask, how many people have a car? Right, so I couldn't get anybody to tell me just outright when I asked this question, but how many days of labor does that car represent? 6 months or a week of your labor? A week of your labor?
Well, are we talking like man
Not how many hours did it take to make it? How much labor, given your wage, how long did you have to work before you could buy that car?
I thought you mean to build the cars.
So you can use current value, did you?
19 days, if it works straight.
Cool. So it's less than a month, that's pretty good.
So it's car.
So if it can range anywhere from a few weeks to, I don't know, a year for home labor. Depending what kind of car you have and how important cars are to you. But why would you do that if you didn't have clear title to that car? Even for 19 days, would you, if somebody just let you borrow that car, would you pay them what you paid for it?
No.
So, one of the things that this allows you to do, right, so among nations of hunters, as there is any scarce any property, or at least none that exceeds the value of 2 or 3 days. So there's a firm limit to what's going to say. If you don't have clear property rights, people will keep things, right? I'll get a walking stick, I'll get like kind of a hammer that I've crafted or something, and I'll kind of sleep on top of it, so that I can steal them without waking me up. But I can get 2 or 3 days worth of capital and protect that pretty well. So there's so many established magistrate or any regular administration of justice. Men who have no property can injure one another only in persons or reputations. So the only thing you're interested in is physical harm and damage to your reputation. So what Smith is viewing property rights as are the things that sort of clarify what is mine and what is mine, so that we can accumulate capital. So if we're looking for an answer for how do you get growth, right? That virtuous spiral I talked about when we first started the class, this is sort of answering that question. Evolution of property rights such that people have a clear idea of what's mine and what's mine, so that we can accumulate the capital in the first place. So if we saw people buying cars, and cars, what's a reasonable price for a new car? Because what kind of range are you looking at? 15 to 20? When you, so the first car you buy after you get a job, how much?
I mean, I would buy.
15 or 20? So I was just trying to calibrate the answer. Sure. Anybody a little higher? 15 or 20?
Oh, no, it's like 30,000.
Yeah.
See the car would get.
I gotta use Sonoma. So, a little more than 15. I'm spreading it out in 5 minutes. But, so you're going to accumulate different types of capital depending on what kind of property rate system it is. So if growth is related to property right, then we have to think about some other implications of property rights. All right, so then we go to our infrastructure. Now, these are canals, roads, everything that develops commerce. This is really just a function of extending the market. So the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, which is the title of chapter 2 of law provisions. Book 1, chapter 2. Then by increasing trade, not only within the country, but also across country borders, by increasing trade, you're going to increase specialization, get more productivity. But these are other categories that are talked about within this same section. One is education of the youth. I think you guys know what that looks like. Public school. Education of the adults, or lifetime learning, is sort of a weird piece in Smith, and I think there's some implications here. Smith seems to think that competitive religion is really good for lifelong education. He seems to think that if you don't have a state religion like England had, and you have something more like what was in the colonies, every different colony had a different sort of religion, so there's some real competition, then eventually what would happen is that it would start looking like that pure and rational religion of which all philosophers have wanted since the beginning of time. He kind of thought that people would get together and search for truth, and they're so motivated by the search for truth that your Sunday sermon would start looking more and more like sort of a rational, truth-seeking sort of exercise. What do you think?
So, does he make like a distinction between a public school environment, which is.
So we're talking about churches.
Yeah. So, public school.
This is for young people.
Yeah, and then it's really transition from like a public school, which is less competitive.
No, he wanted competitive schools too.
Okay.
So remember, his ideal for higher education was that everybody would tip the professor after the lecture. That's the only source of revenue that we get. Because the professors would prepare better, because they're more good tips. Same thing with preachers. You pass around a plate, tip them. Right? The worst thing is to give them, like the Anglican Church, like just pay taxes to the church. That's horrible. That's capture used for reinforcing the government and all that kind of stuff. But if we remove that element, then it would be pure and rational religion. Just like philosophy, every Sunday.
Does he account for the notion that you could run into groupthink in those situations?
He doesn't think you can because nobody would want to go to that church. They would leave. If it's competitive, if they went to a church with groupthink, they'd be offended and they'd leave. So true or false? Is he right or wrong?
Well, like the analogy would be like the scientific peer review process. It's like you go to every single one, and they are continually checking each other's thoughts about what's happening. So if I go to church and I talk with my friends in a different church, you know, I'm like, I don't know if I'm seeing here. He's like, no, man, you got. And then we're having a constructive conversation about some kind of using two options to push past what's common understood within what needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is the vision of competitive religion. Right? Everybody would talk about it, and only the stuff that was really true would survive. So this is, I like talking about this because this is important to show Smith's optimism.
Is he saying that people will find more motivation from trying to seek the truth than just appreciating like the value that church can bring, like community or like a sense of existential purpose?
Yeah, I think he thinks that that's all sort of held constant. When people have community and all that stuff, but they would only have community around things that are also true. I mean, this is his idea of education. Now, notice he's got education of the youth in here, right? So he thinks everybody should get an education. The reason he wants everybody to get an education is because they're working on assembly lines, right? And if what we said was they get really good, they get dexterous, they'd save time, and then they would innovate because it's brutal work. So we're just assuming that if you do brutal work day after day, you're going to try to figure out some way to get out of it. Here's what he says about why we have to spend money on education of the youth. The man whose life is spent in performing a few simple operations of which the effects are perhaps always the same, or very nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention in finding out expedients for removing difficulties which never occur. He doesn't even see it as a difficulty. It's just doing this so that he gets his money and goes home and eats, and then repeats the next day. 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Got time off on Sunday, we're going to talk about philosophy. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion and generally becomes as stupid, as ignorant as it's possible for a human creature to become. I love that. Smith is being very clear there. But notice that he's saying it's possible, right? He never gives up this idea that what separates humans from animals is their reason. Right? It's an Aristotelian framework. I think that's really clear here. Because you can't fall all the way down the hill, but really close.
That's a pretty harsh statement.
Yeah.
Is Smith putting, not necessarily the blame, but is Smith trying to say that the employee or the man is wrong, or that the system that allows him to do things?
So it's sort of an empirical question, right? So where do you see people persist in routine labor? Right. So what I would say is, from what I understand about large cities in China, and I'll qualify this, but large cities in China is if over the last 50 years, the type of work that your grandparents did is different than the type of work that you did. It's gotten a lot better. It's benefited from innovation. Now, you gotta be careful because if you work in Foxconn, apparently it's not that great. Still, to say it's better doesn't really help. Right? But as long as we're moving towards innovation and people are seeing ways to improve and everything's going, Smith's still got the sort of large arc here. Things are getting better over time. Where in the world do you see people, like the 10th generation of drudge labor doing the same exact stuff. That's broken. Right? Now, Smith's solution, his antidote here, is education. Because if you add education to the system, then people will innovate out of the trouble, of the exertion. But without education, they'll be reduced. He goes into more detail about his actions. So he liked the stupid and as ignorant as possible for human creature to become. He goes on for another half. This is only half of it. So go see book 5 of Motivation.
What counts as education?
He's thinking about grammar school kind of things, right? Like, I don't think he actually is saying that you learn Greek and Latin, which would be traditional grammar school. But he's thinking just basic education in morals and humanities, the kind of stuff that Cicero and Aristotle and that. So I'm not sure he would teach him Greek and Latin.
It's something about like
But-
developing your mind abilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna look old. Have to look at that. There's like the glorifies the martial virtues. But I mean, he goes on to say that people that are like this are lousy husbands. You can't go to war if they're flat. Alright, so that was pretty much what I had on Smith. Because that gives us 23 minutes or something. No, more than that. Why can't that have 27? To talk about the test. 7 questions, you choose 4. They're not word for word from the topic posted here. Everybody been here? These are sort of practice questions. I think if you practice some of these, you'll be much better prepared for the test. Remember, having a good operating idea of what these things are helps you answer the questions a lot better. Sam demonstrated earlier. So which is this? It's inequality or harmony. Those are the kind of ways that I would like you to be thinking about this. So let me give you the brief overview. We've talked about the ancient Hebrews, the Greeks. We talked about the New Testament in there too. We talked about the scholastics, sort of cost theory of value, emerging there. Prohibitions against usury. We talked about the Protestants. We'll come back to Weber, so that was why we spent a little bit of time on him. So we'll come back to his theory later. We talked about the ancient regime, or what you might want to call feudalism, sort of social structure of hierarchy within where you have the king, the clergy, and the nobility, and then everybody else, or the peasants. We talked about Mandeville, we talked about physiocrats, and then we got into Adam Smith. So that's sort of the rough timeline we did. Over that period, we picked up a bunch of statements about inequality, growth, market harmony, and types of doing economics. What I mean by the methodology of economics here is questions about whether or not ethics matters for economics. Is economics just applied ethics? Can we make a normative positive split? Can you do a science of economics informed by the science of the natural world and leave the normative stuff to the side? What questions do you guys have? Where are your areas you want to hear more about?
Can you discuss a little more the equation where y is the function of capital labor and then all of the other things that encompass?
Alright, so this is not meant to be a specific form. Somebody asked me if we were going to have to take the first derivative of the Cobb-Douglas with respect to each of the component factors? No. This is just, the functional form just is unspecified. So we're not saying it's got regulars, we're not saying it's linear, we're not saying anything about the particular functional form. All we're saying is output is a function of these inputs, right? So we're dividing inputs into categories, capital, labor, and we added land today, but all, X is just a placeholder for what you would do if you're putting this into a model, is you would just say a vector of all other relevant variables. So you can talk about property rates, you can talk about land, you can talk about legal conditions, you can talk about human capital, right? The amount of education, the amount of infrastructure that's around, all that kind of stuff. But the real focus was supposed to be on, look, all we got is labor. We're trying to figure out how that labor grows in productivity. So now you know why I think that Smith is sort of talking about the productivity of labor. And so if you look at human history, you can sort of say, look, we've always had people around. Why are those people producing more during different periods than others? And so one of the questions is, how many tools do they have? Which, remember, I'm always going back to this idea that capital ultimately is defined by the things that augment labor productivity. Anything that increases productivity of labor is capital, in a broad sense. So what I said is, what goes to accumulating capital? So we talked about this today. So if people can accumulate large amounts of capital, it must be true that they have clear property rights. So whatever that means, right? So we're not trying to defend Locke's vision of property rights. When we get into socialism, we're going to talk about under what conditions do people share things in common. And what Mill points out is that monasteries have a whole bunch of property. But the property right is nothing like a Lockean type property right. It's joined, it's owned in community. And so this university is a monastery. So in theory, everything kind of rests on the shoulders of Father Hendrickson to make a decision for the university. He consults the faculty, he consults everybody else. He's somewhat limited by his superior general, whatever. But ultimately, the responsibility falls on him in a way that it's just not true for a state school with the president of the university. It has other obligations. Other people make different kinds of decisions. So my favorite example is we're in this building because Father Lannon, the business school raised a bunch of money for where the dental school is now. We're going to build a building over where the dental school is, right before I came. And Father Lannon just said, oh, we've got this building, it's not being used. You're going to have to figure something out and use this building. You can renovate it. So the point of that is to say property rights matter, not a very particular articulation of property rights. Don't hear me saying that there has to be some sort of Lockean system or English style system. That's a good question. Are markets corrupting? What do I mean by markets? Well, the system of exchange between different people that has a tendency to sort of spread out.
I think they can be, but it depends on what your standard of corruption is.
Okay. I'm asking you.
I would say yes. Not that they
They
are.
can be corrupting.
They can be, not that they like inherently are.
Okay.
I was like, yeah, I guess the way we're going back the first week's like the deterioration of culture.
Okay, tell me more about that. Right, so you might want to help now. So if somebody believes that culture deteriorates, how would you explain that, given what we've read?
I would say that markets are a catalyst that lead to corruption, in that they foster an activity of exchange trade that can benefit one another. And within that, as people grow in wealth and accumulate wealth, the gap can grow and that can create corruption. But the market itself is not corrupt.
So there's an instrument here, just like a sword. And swords can be used for decorating a house, right? You put them over your fireplace. You can also use them to cut people. And it's just an instrument. So that's one way to treat it.
It kind of assumes an in-group, out-group dynamic. That, if you have a very tight sense of community, then pretty much any form of exchange outside of that could be considered corrupting. But by the time you get to Smith, it's not really corrupting, it's humanizing.
Alright, so you got Smith on one side, who's on the other side?
Say the Greeks.
Okay. I mean, that's how I cast it, and unfortunately, it's actually pretty rough.
So you could also make a case though that markets sort of can get rid of that in-group out-group dynamic, that they can allow for sort of like cross-group exchange.
So I think if I were structuring the answer, what I would think about is, what were the Athenians worried about, right? If they became more Spartan, would that be okay? Is that the Smithian ideal? Right, Smith said we would tamp down our extremes and we'd all come out as sort of universally better. And we would subscribe to the universal virtues. But if Athens became more like Sparta, would that be an improvement?
If the Spartan virtues they took in were more humanizing.
For Adams, or for the Athenians, absolutely not. But for Adam Smith, there would be some takeaways that could be had.
Right, so assuming that Adam Smith likes both groups and thinks they offer something, the fact that they became moderated in his system would look better. You'd almost have to say that this is better, because it's eliminating extremes. I think that gives you a way to critique this idea of universal. So this is what I said in the last class, and I think people got it. So my wife is a German citizen. She doesn't fly a flag, German flag, every day. We've got several at home. But when I take my daughter to school, dads and donuts, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I feel bad. And I have no problem at your graduation. I'm going to stand up there. I'm going to be in a velvet dress, which is really hot. It's May. And I'll be in a velvet dress. And there's all in there. And I'll take my tam off, and I'll cover my heart, and I'll say the pledge, because I think, my position dictates that I honor the sort of institutions in the country you guys are in, all that kind of stuff. But when I go to school with my daughter, I'm conflicted, because her mother's German, and I don't know what I'm teaching her when I model allegiance to one country versus the other. Feel me? Like, do you get my concern? Right? Because where does she belong? Right? Where does my daughter belong in that sense? So there's a sense in which my daughter's citizenship is really with the cosmos, the universe, right? She's outside of the strictly parochial sense of nation and place. How many in this room probably think of themselves as Nebraska? You think of yourself as Nebraska? Nebraska. And you had to make a choice, because you couldn't be from Massachusetts. Same kind of thing. Do you have other places you lived? Or? Yeah. So it's really natural, right? So do we give anything up when we think of giving up our parochial values? Right? You guys might be just totally disgusted by me. I'm turning into the secret police for not saluting at my daughter's school. I feel like your teacher feels this way. Right? I'm just happy that I told her that there's only one way to salute. You can't do that. But do you see, like, this identity of place matters, and so there's something that's given up when you go to this cosmopolitan point of view. So if Smith is really pushing this membership in a larger community where everyone is moderated, there's a big question here. It matters for you guys to decide what you want to do. I asked in last class, can you get together and come up with a sort of community with 350 million of your closest friends? Somebody just said no. And like, okay, well that has implications of that answer, right? So when Madison talks about giving power to government and getting the rules of law rather than the rules of men, if you're doing it at such an aggregate level with a whole bunch of diverse people, do we have any concerns about what that system looks like? Does it matter for the economy? And if Smith is promoting this ultra-cosmopolitan point of view, is he wrong? If the Greeks are promoting that ultra-parochial point of view, are they wrong? I think somewhere in the middle, you gotta figure out where to balance it. I can only sort of pose the questions, that's my job, because I'm like Charlie Hunnam. I'm just gonna ask questions. So how would you structure this? You would say, look, the Greeks had this system, and the reason they had this system is they were very concerned about the loss of some system of coherent virtue. All the way up through the feudal system, people valued coherence of these rules over things like growth and trade. But with that came along inequality, gross inequality. Feudalism is an extremely disgusting system to our taste, as is the sort of Greeks tolerating slavery. Do you buy the story that you've sort of been pitched up to this first exam, which is that over time we've radically changed the way we think about social order, and that we've been much more inclusive and well, relative to 1725, 1925 was a lot better. Pretty clearly, I think. So, what are the implications of that? Is growth inherently good? Are markets actually creating more egalitarianism? Because if they do that, they're probably good, right? But if they're corrupting, if they point us towards things that ultimately aren't the kind of things we should care about, right? If you're sitting there and you're looking at, should I work later or should I go home and eat with my family? And you say, this one pays more money than this one. That's corrupting. Right? It's moved your principles towards the thing that has the reward, the more visible reward. And that's the real danger of markets, is that it's setting up a system that if you don't have anchored values, the way that Smith kind of assumes we'll all get because we'll care about truth and virtue. If you don't have those sorts of principles, you'll always choose the thing that pays more. So the implications of your answer to that question are important. I just don't know where the balance is. It's a problem worthy of the human mind. So I think Smith is extremely optimistic about the sort of power of people's innate virtue to guide them towards things that are harmonious. All right. You talk about methodology. Talk about markets. Growth, we've touched on briefly. Any other questions? We can always break and then we can do questions more one-on-one. So those that are ready to go study their own.
Can you talk more about wealth getting as being considered currency?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've got three different ways of thinking about economics. Right? The chrematistics, it's Greek. Economy and catallaxy. So pull up the catallaxy slide because it's all see that, get that in mind. So here's what I said about catallaxy is it's bringing into proper relationships. So I brought this up when we talked about the Greeks. I'll bring it up again after this test to talk about the Archbishop Whately. And Archbishop Whately says that it's really unfortunate that we grounded our notion of what economy is, or what things that we put under the name economy, and called it economy because that's management of the household. It comes with all of that baggage that the sort of hierarchical Greek system came with. Right? It's managing the plantation. Right? So it's efficiency given. Right? What's the yield on all this kind of stuff. How do you manage a household? And then it's very hierarchical in nature. What is really nice about what Smith is doing here is getting rid of the distinction between master and slave means that you're actually achieving something that is truly voluntary, right? And the highest application of reason in Smith's view, which is, I think this is chapter 2 of book 1, the highest sort of application of human reason is to come up with truly voluntary exchanges. I mentioned this last time, I think, but we have the special word that Mike Munger has used, which is voluntary, truly voluntary. So the kind of things that Smith, that you've seen me talk about with Smith's concern, that people will be reduced to some low and mean state, we don't really think that's voluntary. We don't think that comes out of a system that's oriented the way it ought to be. If you think about it just as trade, then you come up with something different. If you think about it just as wealth getting, then you don't care at all. It's just a matter of keeping school on. But thinking about it through this catalactic exchange has something to do with proper orientation towards one another. The Greeks called it turning an enemy into a friend. Smith talks about expanding sympathy. The word katalaktos is used in Romans when they talk about redemption of the world, right? The world becoming put back into proper relationship with God, and turning an enemy into a friend. This redemptive nature of exchange. And I think if we started with that point of view, we would have a much better understanding of what Smith meant by the nature of trade. So again, this is all very optimistic. It's all, we're going to get to know each other better, and we're going to extend our sympathies. We're going to become more cosmopolitan, suppress all of our more extreme vices, and all that kind of stuff. So you can critique this, but this is the vision that Smith had for market exchange. So I would lump that under Cadillacs. Economy, management of the household just becomes a sort of efficiency task. It's very hierarchical in structure. And then prematistics is sort of the concern in Greeks that markets are truly corrupting because they point us only towards the wealth, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Since I have this slide. All right, well, why don't we break and then we can go to questions?
Yeah. Do you mind expanding on the science of economics a little bit? The question 6 from the possible
Sure.
question
You'll have to
6.
give it to me, 'cause I don't remember.
The first question says, can you have a science of economics? What would it tell us about where value comes from? And then it talks a little bit about explaining the cost theory, but we talked about that a little bit more today.
Right, we talked a little bit about that. So in order to have a science, it has to be objective. It can't just be ethical or normative. So you're leaving the realm. So as we told this story, we said, look, we're going to start in this world where everything's on the table. So we have concerns about wealth and inequality, but these are all ethical questions. So to make it a science of economics, you're going to have to remove it from those normative positions. You're going to have to pull it out of the ethics. Now, I don't know if that's abusive towards ethics, but you're removing it from that context and holding that context constant. So is that possible? Is the point of the question. Can you divorce economics from some of these more normative questions? Yep, that's exactly it. So there's the normative and positive distinction, the is versus the ought.
Also, what I kind of thought about yesterday is like if you like have like a set of guiding ethical principles, right? Let's say you formulate a system saying we're going to try to make a worldview that best reflects these principles. Can it be self-referential? Like if we say, do a single back, check yourself, and see how am I doing, right, then.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are exactly the kind of conversations that people have once, right, when they ask these questions, on the right page. So there's all these sorts of weird self-referential questions about what you can know is true. So how you deal with that question is sort of, I mean, at the very same time that we're talking about Adam Smith and all these other things, he's the beneficiary of the Descartes, or the Cartesian worldview, which is saying that we can't actually know the truth, all we can know is ourselves, and then we extend that out to the world. And that's got multiple layers, also, but that's not exactly what we're emphasizing here. Question of metaphysics versus epistemology. But I have talked